Hi, and welcome to our discussion of modulation. Modulation is the process by which the tonic or tonal center shifts. Now, the modulations that we're going to be discussing occur between closely related keys. So there's a way to get the 5 keys that you could possibly switch to. And this is how. So let's start with our handy dandy key of C major. If we go and add 1 flat, we're going to get F major. If we add here 1 sharp, we'll get G major. So we're either going to go to the dominant or the subdominant right there. And then we have to get their relative minors. So the relative minor of F major is D minor, the saddest of all keys. And then the relative minor of G major is E minor. So 1 sharp minor. And then we're also going to just get the relative minor of C major, which is A minor. So there are 5 places that C major can go. Adding 1 flat in the major and minor, adding 1 sharp in the major and the minor, and also just the relative minor of C major. Circle progressions, as always, very useful as a tool for modulation. So when we're modulating, we're most of the time going to use what's called a pivot chord. And a pivot chord is a chord that's common to both the old key and the new key. And that's how we modulate. You can also call it common chord modulation. We're going to look at an example on the next slide. So here we are in a Mozart sonata, and we're analyzing things, blah, 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 blah. And then we get down here to the second line, and you'll see that there is an accidental. My wholehearted advice is look for the accidental and then go to the chord before it. That's how we find the pivot chord. So what we do, we're in the key of D major, we go to the chord before here. We see we can analyze it as 6/6. 6/6 is indeed a chord in D major. And since we're adding a sharp, when we add a sharp to something that's already 2 sharps, we're going to get A major. That's totally a key that D major could go to because we're just adding a sharp. And then this chord also functions in the key of A major as 2/6. Now, when I say functions, what I mean is, does it exist in that key? If there should be a G sharp in that key, it shouldn't. But if there should be a G sharp in that key, it doesn't exist in that key. And we're not talking about a common chord modulation with a pivot chord. So there are other ways that we can modulate as well. There's something called a phrase modulation, which is also known as a direct modulation. And it occurs between phrases or larger sections where the phrase ends in one key and the next phrase begins immediately in another. I kind of call this a crowbar modulation. It's my own term completely. Whitney Houston does this a lot, where you'll note when that very famous song from The Bodyguard, she stops singing, and then the very next phrase, she's up a whole step. It's very dramatic. This is called a direct modulation. Chromatic modulation can also occur when you just have the introduction of a chromatic note, meaning there is no pivot chord. The chord before does not function in both keys. You just add a chromatic note and bang, you're in the new key. Just be careful because chromatic passing tones and neighbors are not going to be chromatic modulations. They're just, instead of just going as a lower neighbor, we might just be fancy and add a sharp. It's not necessarily a modulation. Let's talk about how we would analyze a chromatic modulation as opposed to the common chord. If this is an example where you see the common chord, we're in C major, do, and then this functions in both keys, 6/6, 2/6, and then you continue in the new key. Now, if I was just doing a direct modulation, let me be able to write here, and let's just say that this was not the case, and I was in C major, I'd be going along 1, 2, 6, 5, 1, and then this chord didn't function in both keys. It does in this case, but let's pretend that it doesn't. I would just kind of go like this and go G major, and then just start going along here. If it does function in both keys, you have to write it in both keys. But if it doesn't, you just kind of say like, okay, now I'm in G major, da, 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 and I keep going, okay? Very important. And that's modulation. We'll be doing a lot of examples in class.